So yesterday, all the media polls came out. My sphere of my talking circle, nobody was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe they Nebraska should have been fifth. Why are they eighth? Or they're overrated." That's a very popular thing. You know how other fan bases might be like, "Oh man, Nebraska might have got this right." You didn't hear a lot of overrated.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, oh, okay, this Rhule thing. Kellen DeBoer went from 11 to 14. Venables went from 6 to 10. The year two is real. Fickle has done it. Rhule has done it. This might be one of the rare years of late where expectations and reality are almost the same for Nebraska football. Because there have been times where the expectations have been way high when they should have been adjusted.
Yeah.
And the reality is you're a 5-win team, but the expectation is you're going to win 8-9 games. There have been a lot more of those of late, or the expectation from an athletic director in 2019 is we just got to get to 6.
Mm-hmm.
When the reality was that was going to be a challenge to get to 6. And so it was a little bit of a gap there. I don't think this year there is much gap between the expectation and the reality. If your expectation, whether it be inside or outside, is in the 8-9 range, the reality is Nebraska is going to win 7, 8, or 9 football games this year. And they're almost exactly the same. And I don't recall this close of expectation and reality in a while.
And just using the poll as a measuring stick here, and we talked about it a little bit yesterday of where you could essentially interchange a couple of those spots and nothing would be earth-shattering by the end of the season. For instance, if Nebraska finished 7th and Wisconsin finished 8th, or Wisconsin finished 6th, USC finished 7th, Nebraska finished 8th. There's that interchangeable element to this. But I look at the teams that in just the Cleveland.com poll that are behind Nebraska. Okay, Rutgers getting a big jump at number 9. That would be a great season for them and for what Greg Schiano's building there. But you look at Washington, that I think a lot of people agreed between what you lost from personnel, but also as a coaching staff, sitting there at number 10 is not, oh, come on, they're getting completely disrespected. And then you get into the Marylands, Minnesotas, Illinois, go on and on and on. It's interesting, as I was lining up someone from Wisconsin, I had gotten into a Twitter thread from someone from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel that was looking at Nebraska's recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
And they had mentioned Peter Zach because Wisconsin was also looking at Peter Zach. And this actually surprised me that it was a journalist that covers recruiting for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel that had mentioned, man, that is a huge get for Nebraska. I don't know if people want to admit this or not, but Rhule is building something there. And that came from someone who covers Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. So again, just to use as an example where Wisconsin, just in a poll in the current day, is pitted one spot ahead of Nebraska. But I think there's recognition of how Nebraska is building their roster. So I thought that example alone was interesting, where you would think typically be like, Nebraska's in the top 10 of a 18-team conference. When are we going to learn that they've got to be able to prove it before? You just don't hear that as much.
So I'll tell you, I think, and a lot of it has to do with Rhule. I mean, I think Rhule is really respected in the business, and he carries himself well. He's not taking shots at other programs.
Yeah.
I think he loves the game of football. He loves football people. They can all relate. And he's a grinder. He's also a guy that had terrible misfortune in Carolina. And so he was labeled as a loser. Okay, so he's gone through it. He hasn't always, he didn't wake up and all of a sudden he was on third base. I'll give you an example of why I think Nebraska made the right hire for Nebraska and the reaction of other schools. And that's a good point about the recruiting, because by the way, that kid is a dude.
I enjoyed watching
this
film. Yeah.
I also am I'm out on crystal balls. I'll have to explain that to Schaefer. I think
Mario or actual crystal balls?
That's what I
crystal
thought.
balls.
Okay.
I think
what do you got against their family?
I'm out on crystal balls. Okay. I think crystal balls are bad for kids. But back to, so for example, and I know this for a fact, when Scott Frost was hired, when it was moving forward like he was going to be hired, there was a former offensive coordinator at Iowa, along with his dad, I won't name names, they said, "Ooh, that's a good hire."
Mm-hmm.
And that sentiment lasted for about a month and a half. And they're like, "Nope, this is danger walking the wrong way." And so then it was, okay, we've seen your true colors. And that's where it started. Some of the, Nebraska was catching strays from Iowa City. This go around, I think football people respect football people that treat the game like it's supposed to be treated, and they're authentic. Like Rhule is completely authentic.
Yeah.
Rhule has never come in and boasted about what Nebraska is. He's been very honest. So I think people that are in the sport can appreciate that instead of being a blowhard.
Mm-hmm.
And I do around the coaching circles and other programs going, yeah, I can see it. And that's a good observation about a recruiting guy looking at a player from North Dakota, of all places. Number one player in North Dakota. Nebraska hasn't gotten a North Dakota guy since Quali in 2009. Is that they would go, ooh, that's a good pickup, an under the radar pickup. So that's why you don't hear, oh my God, it's another season of Nebraska being overrated. That's a good sign. Now you got 4 months to prove people correctly.
Yes.
Or you're going to fall on your face. But it is wild in the sport of college football how much of the year two thing is real. I mentioned DeBoer. I mentioned Brent Venables. Even of all people, and he slipped back in year three, Shane Beamer. Mm-hmm. Shane Beamer, his first year at Carolina, their USC, won 7 games. In 2022, you know who his OC was?
Oh, Satterfield.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They won 8 games and they were inside of the top 25. Mm-hmm. So the year two thing is real.
Yeah.
It's just how much of the year two thing happens in Lincoln. Like what is 5 to 7 the reasonable jump? Is 5 to 8? I mean, 5 to 9, even if you think Nebraska should have won 7-8 last year, that still is a hell of a jump.
Yeah.
Because why they didn't win 7 to 8 last year is what you have to fix to get them to go from 5 to 8 or even 9.
Yeah. And it's a year that I do think if Nebraska were to say, even go 6-6, that I think that there is a consensus amongst people who cover the Big Ten, at least the old Big Ten, maybe this is a little more new to the West Coast schools, that they would actually legitimately be surprised, as opposed to
surprised negatively.
Yes.
Yeah.
As opposed to same old Nebraska. I don't know why we continue to give them the vote of confidence in the preseason. I think, and to your point, and I think other aspects of this team, based on not only how Rhule goes about it, how it just seems like, and this term has been used many, many times, of adults in the room. And I think people in the Big Ten that knew previous coaching staffs would acknowledge that as well, that the way that they're doing their business is more conducive to winning football games and having a sustained success, as opposed to, you might be a flash in the pan. You might, get lightning in a bottle once, but is your model sustainable? That I think if they'd failed to win 7 games, that people who cover Penn State, people who even cover Iowa, people who cover Wisconsin, people who cover Ohio State would say, wow, I'm actually surprised they didn't win more because I really like what they have going there. Again, it probably does, to your point, go back to basically game respecting game, or professionals respecting professionals in the business. But I think also you look at what they return on defense, what you return on the offensive line. There is substance to the idea that there is a jump there. And then you factor in the more, from a betting standpoint, and what the lines will be, your tougher stretch of the season comes in the back end, as opposed to a manageable start to the season. So a lot of those factors in, I think people are saying, this isn't just smoke, or just, it's our annual tradition where we overhype Nebraska. That between Rhule, what they have built, what their schedule at least allows them to have the opportunity to do, I would say that 5 to 8 as opposed to that 5 to 7 range.